hustler, baby.
All right, so today I'm going to be walking through the one GoPro setting that everybody seems to be missing, and it's making me cringe every time I watch a pro's mountain bike video or an amateur's mountain bike video. I'm going to fix that today. Let's get into it. All right, so I am going to show you how to take your footage from this, which is good, to this, which is phenomenal. So this is not going to be a video about all of my settings I use on a GoPro. I will make one of those down the road, and once I make it, I'll link it down below. So the reason you want to use high exposure lock is because with a GoPro, you're usually moving quite quickly. You're going from different conditions all the time. Today is a great example of that. Today is what I would call a harsh light day, which means that it's bluebird, which is awesome, but it's also treed in and lots of shadows, which means when I'm riding down on my mountain bike, I'm going to be hitting berms, I'm going to be going past trees, I'm going to be going into the trees and then out of the trees, and there's going to be all these different lighting conditions as I go down the mountain. So there'll be the super bright areas where I'm out in the open, and then there'll be those shadows from the trees. And if the shadow portion is long enough, which is just a few seconds, the sensor and the processor on the camera will try and adjust anything it can to get everything back into focus. But if I'm going in and out and in and out, it becomes very, very obvious, and because these things have such a small sensor, it's really obvious when you watch the video. The small sensor doesn't allow a huge dynamic range. And without that huge dynamic range and that small sensor and not too powerful processor, the camera will blow out the highlights. So it'll try and focus in the shade, like where I am here, and it'll blow out the back so it's super bright and white. And once you blow something out in the camera, you'll never recover it. If it's too dark, a lot of times you can bring up a lot of that level, but a crushed black looks a lot better than a super blown out white. So what you want is that consistency when you're watching, right? You don't like watching a video and seeing the blown out whites and then back to kind of this dull gray, blown out whites, dull gray, blown out whites, dull gray. You want to have a consistent look through your whole video. All right, so how do you set up your exposure lock on your camera? Basically, when you have the screen open and you have the little menu on the bottom and you can see what you're looking at, what you're going to want to find is the brightest point on the trail that you want to be in focus. Typically, that's going to be the trail itself. So find the brightest spot in the sun. Don't do this in the shade or you'll completely mess it up. Do it in the brightest spot. So you're gonna press and hold your finger, and it's gonna pop up with this screen that says spot meter with a box and a dot in the center. That's step one. The next step you're gonna do is make sure that dot in the middle of the square is on the brightest part of the trail. Then you're gonna be pressing that dot, just tap it. A lock symbol is gonna show up. That tells you that exposure is locked on whatever you pressed on in that center of the dot. Now the next step is very important. You'll mess everything up if you don't do it. In the bottom right, there's a check mark. You have to press that check mark. Once you press that check mark, that box with the lock inside of it's gonna gray out. And that tells you that the lock is on for that exposure. And now you can press the record button and start going. All that being said, you have to make sure that gray box is there. It will disappear pretty easily, even if you touch the screen or change the setting or even stop recording for long enough, it'll reset itself back to auto. So you have to make sure that gray box is there, or you just go through those steps again and reset it. And what you'll find, and I'll show in this video here, is that the dark areas, so the shade is going to be a little darker than it is normally. But it's shade, it should be dark. And I can promise you that it looks a lot better. And if you're really if you go into some trees and you're in that darkness for a while, it's a lot easier to adjust that darkness up than to bring a blown out highlight down. You've lost all detail in a blown out highlight, but you haven't in the dark. So you can bring it up to that dull gray look if you want in editing after, if it's a long enough section, but I can promise you that if it's just a tree shade section that's kind of trees and gaps of light here and there, you're gonna want it on exposure lock with that bright section. But that's it, exposure lock, use it, make your videos better so that I can watch them and not cringe. All right, thank you.